All right, so I want to go through some EV stuff because a lot of people have the workbook, have started the workbook, but aren't 100% sure kind of how to do some of the EV examples. So these are in the very end of the book. There are sections throughout the workbook that are more focused on the kind of the more basics of EV and working through that from a kind of a simple perspective. By the way, this is the workbook. It's the Poker Workbook Math and Preflop. It's available on my site. I'll leave a link for that. Let's see, hold on. Let's do that. Preflop, done. Excellent. All right, so that's the link for it if you are interested in checking it out. If you already have it, awesome, follow along. If not, no problem whatsoever. I'll show you everything that you need to see. I'm going to jump over to 231, again, nearing the end of the book, and this is all about calling AllIn's preflop and kind of looking at that from a more mathematical perspective. So let me just pull up a couple of tools so we can get this going. And I don't need the complex EV spreadsheet. We need the basic EV spreadsheet. Perfect. Alrighty. Okie dokie. So let's hack through it. We're going to do all of these questions. So we're going to start over here on the left page, and the question is essentially this. We're playing 5-10, and by the way, all the examples in the workbook are meant to be as simple as possible in terms of not getting you lost in like, okay, how many big blinds do we have? I just try to make things nice and simple. So all cash game hands are at 510 and all tournament hands are at 51k. I'm sorry, 501k, just so it makes it nice and easy to kind of figure out, okay, what is 100 big blinds or 40 big blinds or that sort of thing. So first one is we're playing 510 with 1k starting stacks. We open to 30, they 3-bet to 100, you 4-bet to 250 total, and they go all in. And we're just gonna ignore the blinds for simplicity, and we'll maybe talk about rake in a moment, but for the moment we're just kind of do it this way. So we're going to say this is the range of hands that we think they are going all in with, and then we're going to figure out the EV of calling with all of these hands. So ace, king of hearts, queens, and tens, and figure out exactly what the EV is. And the whole reason why we do this stuff off table is just so we can start making better estimates, starting to kind of visualize the patterns, especially when there's things that come up often, right? 4-bet pots tend to have similar math at 100 big blinds. If you're playing tournaments and you have like 30 big blinds, you know, there's a kind of a common pattern and structure in the way that stacks tend to get in there. So you start to notice these very, very similar pot odds that creep up, and as such, you can start estimating these things. And by the way, that's what I would do in a situation like this. I'd say, okay, what are the pot odds here? What is my equity requirement? Do I think I have enough equity to justify this? If yes, rock and roll. If no, probably not so good, just fold. And really, that's kind of the fun part about this is it's very, very simple. You don't have that many decisions or options once you're facing the shove, right? You can either call with your ace king or you can fold it. That's it. So all we're looking for is a call profitable here? If yes, awesome. If no, probably get out of here. So when we're actually doing this workbook, there is kind of some prelim stuff. Let me just pinch. There's some prelim text that kind of fills you in on like, okay, what you're looking for, what each of these numbers is supposed to be in terms of like where you can find them, and then rock and roll from there. So let's go back. So we're going to do page 230 first, start with ace king and go from there. So we're going to start by copying the hand of the range that we think our opponent is shoving with. Open up Equilab, plug our hand in, ace of hearts, king of hearts. Going to paste in their range, and we can just double check that, right? Nines plus, excellent. Ace queen, perfect. Ace nine suited plus, excellent, perfect. Evaluate it, and you notice that our ace king has 54% equity. So this is 54%, and if we're winning it, if our up equity is 54%, then our down would be the exact opposite of that. So 100 minus 54 gets us to 46%, easy peasy. And then these numbers are essentially what we're winning. So what is the upside when we do win this pot, and what is our downside, or what is our risk? So our upside is the pot right this moment. We're calling our last $750 to win the current pot, which is $1250. Perfect. And by the way, the actual workbook, if you get the ebook format, you can type all of these numbers directly into the workbook, Control S to save it, and nice and easy, you can pick up where you left off next time, and all your answers will be saved. I spent a lot of time doing that, so hopefully it makes your life a billion times easier. So that's what we win the times that we do win, and when we lose, we're losing our $750 call. Now, perfect. So some people get very confused about these numbers, and they're like, well, I'm actually losing $1,000 because, you know, that was the starting stack or whatever it is. The thing is your upside is just what's in the pot right this moment. Your downside is only what you can lose right this moment. The $250 you already put in belongs to the pot. It doesn't belong to you anymore. So the only thing is you can either fold here and nothing more happens, or you can risk $750. And obviously, if you're going to do that, you'd like to make sure that there's enough upside potential to make that worthwhile. So that's kind of what we're setting up in this situation. So this is my basic EV calculator. Very simple. If you're interested, you can pick it up. It's a name your own price product. You can pick it up at splitsuit.com/sheets. I believe that'll take you right there. And we're just going to plug in all of the numbers that we just worked with. So 1250 is money W, which is that number right there. Percentage W is this one, so it's 54%. Notice that auto completes down here to that remaining 46. And then the only other number we need is money L, which is 750, which we already spoke about. So you notice that at this moment, we are talking about a call that is positive to the tune of $330. So we're risking $750 to make $330. That's pretty darn good. Because again, our only two options here are between calling, and we see calling is plus 330, or folding, which is 0. So obviously it's more profitable for us to call. This looks good. We should definitely be calling with ace king of hearts here. And if you get the workbook, you also get the answer key. So let me poke that up real quick, and let's do a quick zoom in, make things a little bit easier to see. All right. So real quick, back in the workbook, we're on page 230. So go down here, I organize this nice and easy. So you see page 230, there's their range. So if you bought the paperback version, you can just get in here, control copy, and bring it into Equilab just like we did. And we see that the EV of calling is plus $330. Perfect, everything is good to go. We did everything right, easy peasy. All right, so let's jump over to the next one. So that's plus 330. Control S to save, and we're good. So now what we're going to find out is that these numbers, what we win, what we risk, both of these are the same for all of them. So we're going to have 1250 right here. Perfect. Same thing right here. 1250. We have 750 as our risk. Excellent. Perfect. So that's the same regardless, right? Our whole cards don't change that in the slightest. What our whole cards can change is our equity against their range. So let's go back into Equilab real quick, and instead of ace of hearts, king of hearts, let's do queen of hearts, queen of clubs, evaluate it, and notice that we get an equity bump. So if we had 54% equity before, and we see that the EV of calling is plus, then obviously as our equity goes higher, this is only going to get more and more profitable because we're winning a larger percentage of that 1250, we're losing a lesser percentage of that 750, and as such we know the EV just has to go higher. It's just simply what happens here. So let's plug that in real quick. I already forgot what the number is. 60%. Perfect. Which means this is going to be the remaining 40. Excellent. And let's plug everything back into that tool real quick. So again, money W stays the same, money L stays the same. The only thing that changes are these numbers, 60% and 40%. And we see now that we are plus $450. Perfect. Let's double check the answer key, make sure that we got it all right. And we did. Excellent. Easy peasy. And let's just burn through the last one real quick, just because, again, numbers are very similar. The only thing that's going to change is the equity. And obviously, queens is good, but tens is probably going to be less equity, right? It's going to be less than what queens would be. Evaluate it, and we notice that our equity drops down to 47%. Perfect. 47%, and obviously other 53. And let's run the EV real quick just to see what that number turns out to be. 47, 53 plus 190 bucks. And we'll double check the answer key. Plus 190. Excellent. Easy peasy. So happy with the numbers here. Obviously all of these are plus EV calls, and you could go through and try to figure out, like, okay, what is like the break even call in this situation? Well, let's just, for giggles, try to find it. So maybe it's 7 of diamonds, 7 of spades. Evaluate it, drops that down to 38%. Perfect. So yeah, that's roughly about break even is when you start getting down to sevens. If we wanted to call with, I don't know, something silly, let's just say 5 of spades, 6 of spades, then we drop down to 32, drop that number, and all of a sudden we have a really bad call. So one of the ways that I look at this, again, we can compare this to, okay, what are our options and what's the EV of each of them? So the EV of calling is profitable with all of these. The EV of folding is going to be 0. So obviously all of these should be calls. I also like to look at this and say, okay, like, what is this compared to our risk in this situation, right? We're risking 750 bucks, and obviously the bigger the risk, the more I want to make sure that I have a good return on that money. And clearly I prefer getting a 450 return over a 190 return, but all of those are still better than 0, so we're still good to go in this situation. So that's kind of the way that you can look at the workbook when you're doing these kind of call versus preflop shoves and looking at all-in preflops from a calling perspective. It's very simple. You can look at your pot odds, look at the equity you think you have against their shoving range, and if it's good, rock and roll. If no, don't. And then when you're looking at the EV like we're doing here, all we're doing is we're saying, okay, based upon the fact that we have good enough equity to continue given the pot odds, exactly how good is that? Is that very good, or is that sort of good? And obviously I'd rather have queens than tens here, but you know, both of them are still going to be plus EV at the end of the day. So let's take a moment real quick and jump over to the next one. So the next one, again, we have slightly different blinds because we're playing a tournament this time. So 500 to 1K blinds with 40K starting stacks, so 40 big blind stacks. They open to 2.5, you 3-bet to 8K total, and they go all in. And we're going to ignore the blinds in the calculation. And really, these are just simplified table mock-ups. It's not to say that this is for heads up specifically by any stretch. It's just to simplify it to make things a little bit easier to see. That way, it's you don't get lost with all, like, you don't need to see 9 people's stack sizes in order to kind of start making some mathematical decisions here. That was kind of my goal with this workbook, is make things as easy to understand and digest as possible. So I'm just going to copy that range again, plug that into Equilab, paste, and let's start rocking and rolling. So same thing, except cards are obviously different this time. So ace of clubs, queen of clubs, figure out our equity against that deuces plus range. Let's just double check that, make sure everything's in there. Deuces plus, good. Ace 9 offsuit plus, good. No king queen, and ace deuce suited plus. Perfect. So all combinations are accounted for. And again, we could have just copied that directly out of the answer key, page 231, their range, and even just copied the hand itself, but it is what it is. We just copied it right out of here. Either way works. So let's just start by plugging in the numbers, and let's start by plugging in the money stuff first, because that's kind of the easiest. So again, we can call or we can fold in this situation. When we call, the upside is the current pot, which is 48K. If we call and lose, we're risking 32K, right? Simply because that's all we have left to risk. That 8K belongs to the pot, does not belong to us. That was our $8,000 3-bet. That doesn't belong to us anymore. That belongs to the pot, and as such, it gets factored out this way. And we could even just jump ahead here and fill that in for the rest of them. 32K, 48K, and 32K. Perfect. And now we just need percentages. So we already ran this in Equilab and saw that our ace of clubs, queen of clubs has 54%. Perfect. And obviously the inverse of that is that 46. And let's do the math real quick. So take a moment, think about what you think this is. You think it's going to be plus EV or negative EVV? I already kind of showed the answer, so my bad on that. 48 on the up and 32 on the down. And the win is 54%. And again, that percentage L automatically corrects and calculates. And we see that that is plus EV to the tune of 11.2. Perfect. And double check the answer key, 11.2, excellent. So everything's good there, we calculated that out. And if you're kind of looking at this and you're like, how the heck do I even do this in real time? Like, don't worry, you're not alone there. A lot of times it's just simply by doing enough off-table work. Again, you start to develop an understanding of the patterns, to be able to eyeball EV a little bit better, to start understanding where increases in one thing or decreases in another kind of impact the overall EV. But if we just look at like the range that we think they're going to be shoving with, let's just like zoom in super hard. Go over here. So if we're looking at this, like think about what ace queen does, right? Ace queen is dominated by some hands and then coin flip against a large chunk of the range. It has massive domination against all of these hands, right? This ace deuce, this ace 7 suited, ace 9 offsuit, ace 10 offsuit, has massive domination against that, chops against the other ace queen, and then is also dominated the inverse by ace king. Okay, so a large chunk of the time we either have coin flip equity or dominating equity. And a small percentage of the time we're absolutely crushed. So it shouldn't be too difficult to see that this is still going to be good overall. This is still going to be profitable for us to call, just simply because we know our equity is definitely going to be more than half. And that's not like the key qualifier 100% of the time. Don't think that's the case. It really depends on exactly the kind of comparison between what you're risking and what that reward is. But, you know, if you have more than half equity, you're good, right? It's just exactly how much. But even you can tell, like down below, we have this one where obviously our tens has less than half equity, and we still have a plus EV call. So don't just automatically gauge it based upon, you know, do I have more than half equity or not? That's not the way that you should be looking at this. It can be an eyeballer, but it's not like the end all be all. So let's shift over and do the next one. So 10 of spades, 10 of clubs, evaluate that. Equity jumps up to 62. That's pretty wonderful. Perfect. 38%. And again, we can run that right through that calculator. And of course, in real time, you're not going to have the calculator available to you. That's not the point here. Plus 17.6. So the point isn't to say, okay, well, I'm only going to do calculator explorations off table and then in real time have no freaking idea. The point is that you start with a calculator to make sure that you have a precise answer, make sure all the inputs are correct, and then you can start saying, okay, now I need to start eyeballing this, and you can just round numbers, right? Like in this situation in real time, I would just round the upside to about 50K and the downside to about 30K, and those are numbers I can work with, and you know, I'd just probably estimate this to be like 60-40. So 60% of 50K and then 40% of 30K. Very, very quick estimation right there, and then eyeball it and figure out what the EV is. So you do the precise stuff between sessions, so that way in real time you at least have a much better starting point. And again, if we go over to the answer key, plus 17.6, plus 17.6, we are all good. So King Queen is an interesting one because a lot of people would say, well, that's going to be dominated by a lot of stuff. And it is, right? I mean, it's dominated by all the ace-X stuff. It has equity, but it's not going to have an equity edge. And it's going to be the butt side of the coin flip against a lot of the pocket pairs too, and then some domination of the top left stuff. So we can already tell that King Queen is definitely not going to have an equity advantage, right? Right. So 42%, perfect. And then this gets to 58%. Perfect. And let's do a very quick one, 42. And you notice that this is still profitable, right? Again, a lot of people would say, well, we have less than 50% equity, so this clearly can't be profitable, and that's just not the case. This is profitable to the tune of 1.6 or 1.4. My brain is not working well today. 1.6, good. So that's the thing, right, is where we'd be risking 32K to make 1.6K. And if there's a couple extra dominated hands or the equity slips a little bit more, or maybe it's even not quite as wide and we have less coin flips, all of a sudden this can start to get bad pretty quickly. Again, kind of one of those ways that we can look at the output and the answers for doing these kind of calculations between sessions and start saying, okay, well, how do I use that information? So one of the ways you can do it is say, okay, well, what if my opponent just had a different range, right? Because not everyone is going to be 4-bet shipping this kind of range right here. But again, 1.6K is still better than 0, but when you're factoring in tournaments, math, and things like ICM and pressure that way, one life to live, maybe that's not enough of a plus EV risk in order to take it. Maybe your 32K kind of saved back in your stack is going to be more valuable. Now, I'm a cash game player first. I don't focus as much on the tournament stuff, but that's the way that I would process and think about that. And I'll leave it to any tournament specialist to kind of get into the larger factors that you would consider even above those. But I think for the moment that kind of gives us a nice starting point for hacking into some of these things. So that is kind of wrapping up what I wanted to talk about today. I want to go through some of these examples with you. Hopefully this is making sense, at least the setup, so you kind of understand what numbers go where. If you wanted to inverse these and put 1250 here and the percentage over here, it's fine. The math works out the exact same way. Just make sure that you understand kind of what numbers you're putting in, why you're putting them in there. Again, you can do something free like Equilab to figure out the equities. Again, just our hand versus their shoving range. Go forward from there. And then for the actual EV calc, you can do it by hand, you can do it with pen and paper, you can use a free spreadsheet like, the ones I said are at splitsuit.com/sheets, and kind of plug everything in, just a couple of numbers, and boom, you get an output very, very quickly. So hopefully this helps. I'll open up the floor if anyone has any questions, but I think for the moment that kind of wraps up what I wanted to chit-chat about today. So if you have any questions, fire them away.